What's going on, everybody? Welcome in to the Daily Dime here on a very fine Wednesday. Two more NBA games tonight, so kind of continuing with this low-volume NBA style this week, but we've got some plays we like tonight. Right before we went live, we also got some early stocks props that we're going to talk through, and then I also have some early leans for the Thursday night football game, a very good Thursday night football game, Rams and Niners, both from a fantasy perspective and also just from a real-life football perspective, playoff race implications. So fun 2 nights ahead of sports for us here, Zach.
Yeah, man, coming off last night where obviously the Thunder take care of business there, holding Luka and Kyrie, I think 33 points combined for those two. Yeah, that's going to be a bad time for Dallas if you hold those guys anywhere near that. And then shout out to the Magic, man, made that first game really fun, really throughout. So I'm excited for these games here tonight. We've got, of course, the streak on the line for the Warriors, 15 straight wins for the Dubs over the Rockets. I'll tell you right now, man, I think the streak ends tonight. I think Houston wins this one. And like you said, we got the stocks props. You and I were sitting there just talking about all the props that just popped up. And like, oh, shit, we got to go live. So we're here now. I'm ready to get into it.
Yeah, this is going to be a fun slate. And just real quick, from a basketball perspective, how much fun to watch are the Thunder, especially in the defensive end. Like when you can just throw a rotation of Lou Dort, Kayson Wallace, Alex Caruso at opposing guards, goodness gracious, there is just no breathing room whatsoever, no breaks for the opponents. And Luka and Kyrie certainly learned that last night.
Yeah, well, and imagine them adding somebody to this rotation like, I don't know, Chet Holmgren, right? Yeah. This motherfucker's going to come back and they're... I'm not looking forward to, I've said this so many times, not looking forward to the next, 6 to 8 years of Oklahoma City basketball, given my favorite team plays in the same conference. Yeah. But obviously the winner of this Rockets and Warriors game will go to Vegas to face OKC and the Bucks awaiting the winner of the Hawks and Knicks. So I know we have a number of NBA picks. Like you said, you've got some NFL picks. Where do you want to start?
Why don't we start with the NFL picks, and then we can go all in on NBA, because I know we saw there are some profit boosts that people can take advantage of just in NBA-specific stuff. So maybe we get some NFL plays in early, then we just go all in on NBA. And what we were talking about doing was like a round robin of 3-pick plays with NBA, so you can use all of those profit boosts, something like that. So let's start over on the NFL side, and I really have 3 leans here. So the first one is a very strong play, I think, and that is just George Kittle over 57.5 receiving yards against these Rams. The Rams are a positive matchup for tight ends, wide receiver 1s, and wide receiver 2s. They're just a good passing matchup all around. The key here is George Kittle without Christian McCaffrey has been an absolute monster all season, and I think that only is increasing now that we see, something's not right with Deebo Samuel. Some say it's he's still recovering from the pneumonia he had earlier this season. Some say he's just fat and slow now. Regardless of what you think is going on with Deebo, he's not the same guy. We saw them script some really cool screen pass type plays to him. He's getting more valuable routes downfield. There was a time in the last couple of years where it's like Deebo's number 1 in the pass game, or Ayuk is number 1 in the pass game, then Deebo, then McCaffrey, and Kittle is a distant 4th, sometimes being treated like a left tackle. Not anymore. He is the primary target on this offense. They are trying to get him the ball. They know he's the explosive play guy now, with no McCaffrey, potentially no Garendo, also no Mason. So George Kittle over 57.5 receiving yards, I think, is phenomenal.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty strong start here. And again, I have the benefit of seeing, I got the cheat code. I know where you're going next with this Niners team. And I think I even liked, again, you're the NFL expert here on screen, but I think I like this Jennings pick even better, dude.
Interesting, because we're going to Jennings over 5.5 receptions at 1.1x. Now, one of the things I like to do, and we're going to talk about this exact same thing with Cooper Kupp, so we can actually kind of look at the difference between them. I like to look at, okay, what does the receiving yards prop imply about the receptions, and what does the receptions prop imply about the receiving yards? And this one just doesn't pass the smell test of you. One of these has to be too low. If he's at 67.5, that receptions prop should be probably 0.9, 0.95x, something like that, not 1.1x. And I do think it's just good all around. But I like the 5.5 receptions because we have seen a couple games lately where Jennings has more of a high volume role, but not like the explosive play role. So if we bring up Juwan Jennings' game log, we see like in that last Rams game, in the last Rams game, he had the massive 11 receptions, 175-yard game. That was way back in week 3. But more recently, 10 receptions for 91 yards against Seattle immediately after another 11 target game, 7 receptions for 93 against Tampa Bay, 7 targets against Green Bay, 8 targets and 7 receptions this past week against Chicago, just 90 yards there. So in 3 of the last 4 and 4 of the last 6, and actually like close to being 6 of the last 7, 7 of the last 8 games, his yards per reception has been under the number that you would need for him to land on 5 receptions and over 67.5 receiving yards. So again, these two just don't align, where one of these, either the 67.5 receiving yards is wrong or the 5.5 receptions at 1.1x is wrong. I happen to think it's the 5.5 receptions. So over 5.5 receptions for Juwan Jennings. 1.1x I think is really strong too.
Yeah, right. He's over this number in 3 of his last 5, but like you've got that Blizzard game in there. So like I think you can discount that a little bit. And I also just think like, and maybe I'm biased because I'm somebody who got lucky and picked him up in a couple dynasty leagues, salary cap leagues, things like that. But Juwan Jennings is good. And so like the fact that we're getting the 1.1x multiplier there, I like that pick a lot. I know I see AJ in here. Our buddy Shazam saying Tutu Atwell season if they have a lineup. He also said when we opened up with Tari Eason on the screen, insert shocked Pikachu face. We were talking Tari Eason. That is Alex's screen though. I see Dello in here saying what's going on. What's up, Dello? Good to see you, buddy. All right, so how, like, I know AJ brought up Tutu. Maybe we can take a look there, but what do you got to bring it back? Because we need a Rams pick now. So is it Atwell or are we going somewhere else?
Yeah, let's see. I mean, this is what I expected. No yardage props up yet for Tutu Atwell. But I do think we have a fairly strong one here in over 62.5 receiving yards for Cooper Kupp. So take a look at this, right? Like both of these guys are fairly similar in a yards per reception standpoint. Only 5 yards different, and yet 0.87x on Kupp's 5.5 receptions. So in this case, I think it's the other one that is wrong. I think is the 62.5 number that is too low. Kupp has been, clearly the number 2 to Puka Nacua, but he's still pretty damn good. Now, one thing I will point out on this season, for most of this season, San Francisco has been a really good slot matchup, and they are still a pretty good slot matchup on a yards per route run basis, but in a total yards allowed perspective, they have become a lot worse. And over the last 5 weeks, they've allowed the second fewest slot yards. So I'm not quite as sold on this one as I was when I first found it this morning and hadn't yet dug so deeply into the recent numbers of how San Francisco has performed against slot matchups. But I still think 62.5 is low for Cooper Kupp. It's just now at a point where, like, you know what? Maybe I do want to wait and see what we get from a Tutu Atwell perspective. Now, the other reason to like Cooper Kupp here instead of Puka Nacua, San Francisco negative 17% to opposing wide receiver ones in our DVOA adjusted fantasy points against data, 0% for wide receiver twos. So purely neutral against wide receiver twos, a bad matchup for tight ends, wide receiver ones, and wide receiver threes. So in that regard, Cooper Kupp is still the guy to go to against these Niners.
There you go. You see AJ already in line. Said he bet that on Bet365 like 30 minutes ago, saying
Beautiful.
Cooper Kupp's line extremely low. So little 3-pick play there if you want to fire that in. And I think we can get 3 picks at least here on the NBA side of things and get into a little 6-pack here this morning.
I also think there's just a chance that this is a really pass-heavy game for both of these teams. And you can even apply that more to San Francisco perhaps than LA, because LA is always a little bit pass-happy. But San Francisco missing Christian McCaffrey, missing Mason, potentially also missing Garendo. Yeah, Taylor's probably going to run the ball just fine. The scheme is phenomenal in the run game, but it wouldn't surprise me if they say, you know what, let's still use a lot of play action and just use the threat of the run, but put the ball in Purdy's hands. They have continued to throw the ball well. He threw the ball extremely well this past week against a really good Chicago pass defense, so it wouldn't surprise me at all to see them be really pass happy. And if that's the case, like all 3 of these guys are in even that much better of a spot.
That makes sense to me. So I'm going to keep my eye out for Tutu there. I'm sure we'll have more discussion in the Pick'em Games channel, the NFL channel here in the FTN Fantasy Discord. But let's jump into the NBA Cup slate here tonight. Let's go to Kevon Looney first, and then we'll talk about a number of Rockets on the other side of this game. What I'm looking at here this morning for Looney is the higher than 12.5 points plus rebounds for Kevon Looney. Now, he's averaging 13.5 points and rebounds in 16.5 minutes per game on the season. So start over the last couple of games, right? We had Draymond miss at least 2 of those. He started a couple of those. He's averaging 22.1 minutes per game in his last 5. Last game out, we saw Draymond come back, but we saw Trayce Jackson-Davis DNP CD. Okay, so in terms of the projections here at FTN Fantasy this morning, we've got Kevon Looney projected for 14.3 points plus assists in 18 minutes. But I don't think it's out of the question that we could see him exceed that 18-minute number, because if Jackson Davis DNPs again here tonight, I think that projection may be like 2 minutes too low. Okay, the matchup, right? That's another thing why I think we could see more Looney minutes here tonight. I think we could see Looney and Draymond out there. Zach, this better not pump the ownership on it. Yeah, see, same coaching tree there, Dello.
Dello, how many people do you think are watching this stream right now? it's not enough to do that.
Yeah. Against Şengün, since the start of the 21-22 season, Looney has faced Şengün 10 times. He's over this number in 7 of them, including 5 of his last 6. And the one miss in those last 6, he had 12. So looking back to the early November game, right? Because we've seen these 2 teams play twice already this season. On November 2nd, Looney played 16 minutes off the bench. In regulation, that one went to OT. Draymond played 35, but fouled out right before overtime. Jackson Davis started and played 13 minutes. So Looney got up to 21 total minutes with the extra 5 in overtime. But smashed this number then, and again, over in 5 of the last 6. I think this one is at least a point too low. And if we get Trayce Jackson-Davis, so I think we have projected in for like 6 minutes here this morning, because, again, I don't think he's banished from this rotation forever, but not shocked to see him DNP again here tonight. So I like this one a good bit.
Yeah, I was kind of not necessarily surprised, but I was pleased to see that we had a very conservative minutes projection on Looney at 18.5, and he still is a lean in the model on the over for both points and rebounds. So you combine them, it looks really good. The other thing that I noticed was in that last game without Dre against this Houston team, we saw Trayce Jackson-Davis play 17 minutes and was a minus 21. No, maybe he might have played 21 minutes, was a minus 17. Yeah. And then Looney played 27 and was a plus 21 in those minutes. So now you get this matchup. Yeah, Dre's back, but there should be a pretty obvious lean in terms of who gets those other minutes. So I think, like we said, that 18.5 on Looney seems pretty conservative. Very good chance he plays low 20s. And if he's playing low 20s, he should absolutely obliterate this number. And even if he does play 17, 18, 19 minutes, I still like it.
Yeah, I'm with you. So let's go to the Houston side of things here. And I've got 3 picks I want to talk about. Let's start with Dillon Brooks. And I'm actually going to attack his first quarter points prop here and break a new ground, I guess, for at least for this NBA season on the Daily Dime. We're going to take the lower than 3.5 first quarter points on Dillon Brooks. And then after that, we're going to look at Amen Thompson, see if we can correlate a little bit. Dillon Brooks is under this number in half of his games this season, 12 of 24. So no huge lean there just from game log watching. But he is under this number in 4 of 5 games against the Warriors since coming to Houston. And I think a big factor in that, maybe not a huge factor, but more overall on the slate tonight, which we'll talk a litk bit more when we talk the DFS side of things. He hacks the shit out of the Warriors, man. And like that's not new for Dillon Brooks in highly contested matchups going back to his days with Memphis, right? But he picked up 2 fouls in 3 of the 5 first quarters that he's seen the Dubs since being in Houston, and just overall against Golden State in his last 6 matchups. That goes back to his last game. Where was he before? I mean, he was in Memphis before this, but in order: starting with the most recent. Total fouls against the Warriors, 4-6, 4-5, 5-5, right? So like not totally fouling out of these games, but we've seen in the recent past that he has picked up 2 fouls, lost time in the first quarter against this team. And it's not like he soars over this number in general in the first place. And I think if you look at what our points projection is, or just his line sitting there at 13.5, with people enticed there, or I guess right, the juice going towards the under, the 0.94, he would be under 3.5 points per quarter then. So just a little extra sprinkle on top there for how much I like this under 3.5 first quarter points, because we have room for him to go out there and bang a 3 and still, he's not a guy that drives to the rim a ton. He's not a very high volume shooter in the first place. So I like this, and I like pairing it with the Amen Thompson higher than 11.5 points. And now Amen is over this number in 13 of his 24 games. So very similar to Dillon Brooks. We don't have a strong lean just based off that. We do have him projected for 13.3 points tonight in the FTN fantasy model. And I do think that we're live to see Coach Udoka shorten this rotation up here tonight. I think we will see less Reed Shepherd. I think we could see less of a guy like Steven Adams, a little more of Alperen Şengün, but maybe some Jabari Smith at the 5 as well when Golden State goes smaller. So we have Amen Thompson projected for 29 minutes, and maybe that's a little bit hot, but he's averaging a little over 26 minutes per game on the season. And when he's played 26 or more minutes, he's over in 8 of 10 games, and over in both games against the Warriors this season with 18 and 14 points respectively. So I was actually looking at his 18.5 points plus rebounds. They took that down to 17.5, but now we're getting 0.94x, and there's no arrows to ladder that upwards. So I'm sticking with the points here this morning. And again, you take Dillon Brooks off the floor for the Rockets this season. So we say maybe Brooks gets dinged a little bit from foul trouble, as he has over the last couple seasons against the Warriors. Who leads them in minutes with Dillon Brooks off the floor? It is Amen Thompson. So I like pairing these two guys together.
And it's not just like purely coincidental that he's gotten into foul trouble against these Warriors, because there's obviously a lot of bad blood and chippiness between himself and Draymond Green. So I think that's not just like that, hey, that Brooks and Draymond are going to get into a scuffle, or they're going to get physical as a result of that and make fouls. It's also that refs are a little bit curious early on in games to see, hey, what's going on between those two, and can we set the tone early to make sure that they don't get out of hand here. So I like I said, I don't think it's a coincidence at all that he's been in that much foul trouble against these Warriors.
Well, and as of this season, man, it's not just Brooks versus Draymond. Tari Eason and Draymond have some beef too. So let's talk about Tari Eason. Not in that sense, but we know that we have liked when we see Tari Eason stocks, steals, blocks, props, whatever. And we have those this morning here. We have 2.5 stocks. We have 1.5 steals, 1.09x on the steals. I want to toss it to you. Which one do you prefer? Because like the steals is what stands out to me first, just on the surface. He's got 2 or more steals in 7 of his last 8 games. He had 4 against Golden State earlier this year, but 7 total stocks. And I know you have some matchup data for stocks against the Warriors.
Yeah, I mean, so from a pure just like which number stands out based on Tari Eason's typical production standpoint, it is clearly the steals. The steals would probably be better even if we weren't getting 1.09x. The problem is Golden State is a fairly negative steals matchup, and they are a tremendous blocks matchup. So you take that into consideration, and then you also factor in the fact that we have him projected, I think it was like 1 to 2 minutes above his season-long average. And I just think we want to take some of the variance out here and go to the 2.5 stocks. I wouldn't go to a blocks number if we had just a pure blocks pick, which doesn't look like we do, but they could always add one. I don't think I'd want to go to that, but the stocks I think is the way to go here. 1.09x isn't enough to get me to go away from what I think is the higher probability play.
Yeah, and good to see Weisberg in here saying the Dubs turn the ball over a ton. Stocks make a lot of sense. And I'm with you. Full disclosure, I've got both in my entries here this morning,
There you
and underdog. If you haven't seen already, I think you mentioned it already on the stream, Alex, but we've got 25% NBA only profit boost tokens here this morning. So using those up quick. I see Derek in here too saying thinking under on Şengün. PRA 28 and 29 in the previous two matchups, one with and one without Draymond. I mean, what is the line at here? 37 and a half.
Yeah.
That feels like a good line to me. We haven't projected literally less than half a PRA under that, I believe, on the morning run. So that's not one that sticks out to me, especially with how many Houston props I'm already on this morning with Amin and Brooks and Tari. Do you have any thoughts on Şengün there?
The biggest concern that I have is he's averaging 31 minutes per game on the season. Where do we have him tonight?
34. Again, we haven't projected to tighten this rotation.
Yeah, exactly. That's the aspect that scares me on the under.
Yeah, for sure. Well, so I know we were looking at kind of similar to last night. We have more picks from the second game compared to the first.
Mm-hmm.
We have Josh Hart questionable in that early game. And just, I guess, as a whole, it's not just Josh Hart. On the Atlanta side, we have Bogdan Bogdanovic and Jalen Johnson both questionable. And then in that late night game, like we should mention, Şengün is questionable. So is Steven Adams and Andrew Wiggins on the Warriors side of things. For what it's worth, I think every single one of those guys plays. If I had to like Nerf gun to my head, who doesn't? Sure, Steven Adams sits out and we give his 8 or 9 minutes to Jock Landale and we keep pushing. I think all those other guys give it a go here in the quarterfinals of the NBA Cup. But you were looking at some 3-point props. Like, is that something you have in this morning? Maybe a Bridges and OG. I know we were looking at that.
Yeah, so there are two aspects of this matchup for the Knicks that really stand out on paper. So the first is that Atlanta is a great steals matchup, and they are a great blocks matchup, so they are a great stocks matchup. The problem is, like OG Anunoby, yeah, he's been on an absolute tear in the stocks department of late, but he's still averaging 2.7 on the season, so 3.5 is a big, big number. Now, like I said, he's been on an absolute tear, so I think that I'd be more likely to go to the blocks for OG Anunoby over 1.5 at 1.11x. He's been over 1.5 blocks in 6 consecutive games. You and I were talking a little bit beforehand, like, is there a reason why a player can get hot in the stocks department or the blocks department? And outside of like, a total rotation type change where maybe OG Anunoby is getting a lot of, backup 5 minutes in addition to what he usually does. Outside of that, there isn't really an answer. So I think it's noteworthy that he's been this good in the stocks department. And I think it's noteworthy that the matchup here is great against Atlanta. But I'm not totally sure I want to do this because on the entire season, like this looks like a pretty bad number for him.
Yeah, I think it's one that I'm staying away from at this point. But, again, that was one of the things we were discussing and why we were like 5 or 6 minutes late here this morning.
Now, the second aspect of the matchup against Atlanta is that they've also allowed the most threes in the league by a fairly wide margin.
Yeah.
So here's the way that I think I want to play this. We can go to Mikal Bridges. In fact, let's just do this. Let's type in the 3-pointers made and take a look at all of the Knicks that we have here.
Yeah.
OG, because he's at 0.8x, I don't love. Now, maybe you could go to 1.29x at 2.5. Mikal Bridges has shot the ball a lot better this month. Good for the Knicks, bad for Sixers fans to actually see that. Didn't want to see Mikal Bridges figure out his shot, but that 2.5 number does look pretty good. If Hart plays, I think the 1.5 for him looks fine at 1.26x. But more than anything else, the way that I'm going to approach this, I think is, all right, they've got a great threes matchup. They've got a great stocks matchup. That's a hell of a lot of upside in a lot of different departments for fantasy points props, which we don't have yet, but certainly we'll end up getting them for Karl Anthony Towns. Maybe we get them for OG Anunoby, Mikal Bridges. Maybe they're good enough to actually get them, especially on a 2-game slate. So I think what I would want to do is just wait and see what we get in the fantasy points department. If we don't have a ton of them that I really like, okay, now I'll maybe go and find those stocks or the 3-point picks that I'm like already on the verge of liking but don't love, and just wait and see if we get a fantasy points number that we do love.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. And we saw some significant disparities between Prize Picks and Underdog with the fantasy score preps yesterday. Unfortunately, like Kyrie didn't come through on either side, even though we thought that was a couple points too low. Right now over on Prize Picks, we do have the Cat Fantasy score. It's set at 50. So we're like a point over that, I believe, in the model this morning. So it doesn't jump off the page, but if we get some of those similar discrepancies, maybe this is posted for like 48.5 on underdog, in which case, obviously, we would like it a lot more. And I see Weisberg saying also from Monday, hit on everything but that Burrow long run prop. Yeah, that was a tough beat at the end of that night. And Weisberg asking, how do we feel about Draymond threes?
Let's see. 1.5 threes at 1.1x.
We've got him for 1.51 made threes here,
which probably isn't good enough. Averaging 1.4 on the season. He's been over in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 games. So over in 10 of 21. We have him slightly better than his season-long average, so we probably get to like something like 50%, which not good enough at the 1.18x. I'd like to see something 53, 54 at minimum to like that.
Well, I think the other thing too is I'm looking more towards, if I'm looking at 3-point props for the Warriors, I want to see what we can get some of the unders at, because the Rockets are second in the league in terms of limiting opponent three, not just 3-pointers made, but 3-point attempts. And so you can see that with some of the threes made props. Like I think Buddy with the 2.5 is the only Warrior that has just the 1x multiplier on either side. Like the other guys are juiced one way or the other. Like I wish you can see like Steph, like if we were getting the 1x multiplier on the lower, like I might consider that, like in the 3.5, 1.19x. I don't know if I can get there either, because like it's not just the Rockets we're projecting to tighten their rotation today, right? I think we have Steph Curry in for like 34.5 minutes, which is above his season averages, averaging 4.2 made threes per game on the season. So there, I was kind of perusing that while you were talking some of the NFL props, and I didn't see really anything from the Warriors in terms of those threes that I liked. And maybe that changes. Maybe we're going to have to hover over some of these buttons before Wiggins potentially gets ruled out later tonight. But we'll see on that. Again, I lean that he plays. So I think what we see now is really kind of what we're working with.
The pod under 0.5 was semi-interesting, but now that I'm actually looking at the data, it's not strong enough. He's averaging 0.9 per game. He has a 3 in 13 of 22 games. So the matchup is good, and we have him projected to play fewer minutes than his season average, but not enough so to make me like the under. He's also hit 1 in 3 consecutive games.
Yeah, and with pods too, like I just think he's better than a 24% 3-point shooter. The kid was 39% from 3 in his rookie year last year. Like I think that starts to come up. So I'm also staying away from that. Like in that instance, again, like I'm staying away, but I might even just say like, what's his 1.5 threes? Because I see that arrow right there, right? Like 2.29x. Again, I don't want that against Houston, but I think I like that better than almost anything else we see here for the Warriors threes.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. He's hit 2 in 2 consecutive games, so maybe he's finding a shot. I did play a lot of minutes last game, so.
And we see Ian in here saying, let's make
I mean, so like this is kind of how I feel about a lot of these picks, where I like them all. I don't love them, and I want to see what we get in the fantasy points department before I start firing, because we've got these profit boosts today. You don't want to just use them up, right? So like I want to make sure that I am putting my absolute best foot forward on all of those profit boosts, which means waiting to see what we have on the fantasy points department. Now, what I might do already is, I'm definitely concerned that some of those NFL picks are going to move, and they might move a lot because I like them so much. Like it wouldn't surprise me if Kittle is at 65.5 by game time. He's at 57.5 right now. So maybe I start firing with some of these NBA picks sooner than later so I can use up those NFL picks. But as far as the NBA picks go, you guys won't see me post any plays in the Discord until we get some fantasy points dropping in.
We have, of course, the fantasy scores are up there on Prize Picks. Some of the lines that stand out, just kind of putting them up against what we have projected here this morning. Jalen Johnson higher than 40.5. The model always kind of loves Jalen Johnson. Like we've seen that throughout the early parts of this season, but there's a significant gap there between our projections, a couple points higher with that line. And then in the late night, both Tari Eason and Amin Thompson look pretty good, as does Steph Curry. His fantasy line is set at 39. We're well into the low 40s in terms of his fantasy point projection.
A couple of things there. I'll say on Jalen Johnson, I'm a little bit concerned there because he does strike me as one of the players who's like most sensitive to the game environment itself. Yeah. Pace up games, I love him. Knicks, not a pace up spot. So
yeah,
I don't love that aspect of it. But it does remind me, you were mentioning Dyson Daniels 3.5 stocks is something you kind of like. Now the matchup, both from a steals and blocks perspective, not good with New York, but Dyson Daniels might just be like in a tier of his own in terms of getting these stocks. So how do you feel about his 3.5?
Yeah, I actually like that one if we're looking back at that stocks board, because we've got him projected for like 4.1 and some change here this morning. And just going back to the right, like it's not a pace increase here for the Hawks, but like I think we can soothe some of those concerns with the 237.5 implied total that we still have. So again, maybe the projection here, which is like a hair above 45, maybe that's a little hot, but you've got some buffer room there. Even if that came down a point or two, the model's still going to like the over on Jalen Johnson's fantasy score there. But again, we'll see what Underdog posts some of those as. Usually we get those like right after the stream. So the FTN Fantasy subscribers will certainly get some of those if we find any. Where does that put us in terms of 6 NBA picks?
We've got a lot that I haven't clicked, so I should probably go click some of them. So let me get rid of the NFL picks here so we can click all of the ones we talked about. So let me throw Dyson Daniels in here. Let me throw Bridges over 3s in here. We actually kind of glossed over it, but I did want to mention, I think from a blocks perspective, Towns at 1.42x, given the matchup with Atlanta, is interesting. So I'm not going to click that one now, but I think that could definitely go in there as well. Help remind me here, Zac, what are the things we discussed that I haven't clicked?
Well, so we've got Bridges, Brooks, Thompson, Looney, Eason. To me, the 6th pick would probably be, you've got it in there with Dyson Daniels. That would be my 6th right now on Underdog with no fantasy score props posted.
So then we can throw in the Towns blocks if we want. We can throw in. It sounded like we were close to an under on Buddy Hield 2.5 threes.
Yeah, let me see.
I think it's interesting to note he's averaging 3.3 on the season, but he's only gone over that in 12 of 23 games. So, that's
Kerr's. To me, Kerr is going to continue to treat him kind of like a hot hand. If he comes out in his first rotations and he bangs a couple in there, then we probably see him get, mid maybe to upper 20s minutes. But I think we're going to tighten around Draymond and Wiggins if he goes, and Steph Curry. And again, I do think Wiggins plays. And then whoever gets hot from kind of the also-rans on the wing there, whether it's Pajemski, whether it's Buddy Hield, whether maybe Lindy Waters comes in and makes an impact, somebody like that. I don't love that. But we've got 6, right? So if you put the Towns blocks in there, we get up to 7. I'm not against Buddy being the 8th there, but I think I maybe feel better just with the 6 and leaving Towns out, or round robining some of those 6 picks and dropping the Towns blocks in there. But I think we can also wait like 20 to 30 minutes and maybe get that Towns fantasy score prop and use that instead.
Yeah. And let's try to narrow this down to our favorite 3, so that if anyone wants to do a 6-pick play of 3 NFL, 3 NBA, which should they be looking at? I definitely think we want Looney in there.
Yeah, Looney is one for me. And I think probably Eason and Thompson just beat out the Dylan Brooks first quarter prop for me. Because I feel great about Thompson and Eason either way. I just think we can get some of that extra correlation putting Brooks with Thompson in some of these entries. So Looney, Thompson, Eason would be my shout for our favorite 3 pick of the morning.
I think I am with you there. When we get some fantasy points props, it wouldn't surprise me if I end up thinking that I will still be really high on Looney, but I might end up going to some fantasy points in front of everything else that we have on this board, which is why I want to hold off until we get some of those. It's also possible we either don't get as many of them as we'd like, or they just come in at higher numbers than we're expecting, and I'll end up liking these more regardless. But all right, let's do a quick recap on these. Looney over 12.5 points plus rebounds. Dylan Brooks under 3.5 first quarter points. Amin Thompson over 11.5 points. Tari Eason over 2.5 stocks. Dyson Daniels over 3.5 stocks. Mikal Bridges over 2.5 threes. And with that, let's turn over to the DFS slate and talk about this first run of ownership and GPP scores.
Yeah, man. Placeholders, Knicks and Rockets, but you factor in the GPP scores, some of the ownership here this morning, and of course the GPP scores do factor in ownership. You're seeing the Hawks there as well, and I think kind of to what I pointed out earlier with that implied total, it's an 8-point spread, which has moved in favor of the Knicks this morning. So I think you can probably, again, infer Josh Hart probably going to give it a go here tonight. But man, like, what do we have to say? Like, unless this is your first DFS slate of the year with the New York Knicks, like, they're still going to be. Precious Achiuwa is back, but we have now just like no more Jericho Sims, no Huck Porty, no Kolek, like none of that BS. Campaign is back. Precious is back. And these top 6 guys, if I was looking at the DK projections in the optimizer this morning, and if you just sort by points per dollar, 6 of the top 12 guys are the main 6 Knicks rotation guys, the 5 starters and Deuce McBride. So I think, again, kind of like I said yesterday to close the stream, I think picking out the right Knicks here is maybe going to be the key to the slate. But also expecting the Rockets again to look good. And I think it's really interesting that the model, in terms of the GPP score, pointing to Tari Eason at 5,200 as its favorite tournament play from the Rockets, just above Dylan Brooks and Alperen Şengün. And again, it's a 2-game slate, so like 30% ownership for Tari Eason is not crazy. That's not over-owned, in my opinion. Even like a Dylan Brooks 43%. That makes some sense at 4,400. And you can see a guy like Dylan Brooks in the mid 40s in ownership, still getting a pretty healthy GPP score. So I think, again, that's good chalk. And to that end, we talked about the concerns with foul trouble for Dylan Brooks in this matchup historically. Right now, if the slate started in 5 minutes, a rule I would have in on DraftKings for my MME build was minimum 1 Amin Thompson, Dylan Brooks. I don't think I would 100% prevent the opto from pairing those two together in lineups, but I think I know I want one or the other because based on their prices and the production that we can expect from Amin Thompson on a point per minute basis, I feel like I'm going to want at least one of those guys in every lineup.
Yep, I agree with that. I also want to just point to the projection here for OG Anunoby at 37.3 and remind people, like, that's why I hope that he has a fantasy points prop. That would be a really good one to go for. The other thing I think that really stands out to me here is it's a 2-game slate. And sometimes, especially on these really small slates, people just over factor in the matchup. And I think that's what's going on here, which is why we have so many of these Atlanta guys near the top of the GPP scores. I mean, look at some of these ownerships. 2-game slate, 20% and 5% and 27% and 10%. Like, that's really, really low for a 2-game slate, especially for guys who are going to be on the court for quite a while. So think of it this way. If every single Knick outperforms their expectations because of the matchup and every single Atlanta guy underperforms their expectations because of the matchup, then they're going to lose by like 30. And if you don't think that's going to happen, which I don't think it's going to happen, then some of these Atlanta guys have to produce. The production has to come from somewhere. And if the entire field just assumes that they can't produce because of the matchup, then they're going to be really under-owned, and that's what we're seeing.
Yeah, and you see similar stuff on FanDuel, right? Those usually aren't too far off, especially on a short slate like this. But Clint Capella, the number 1 GPP score over there on FanDuel, 5,400 in your center spot. Now, you can't get to a Karl Anthony Towns over there. He's 54% projected owned. Still got a positive GPP score on FanDuel. But also Şengün, 8,900, third in GPP scores. Kevon Looney is 4th there. Yeah. So to Delo's point about how much he likes Kevon Looney, so does the model, especially on FanDuel. And then 3 of the top 5, I mentioned Clint Capella on FanDuel, number 1 GPP score. Jalen Johnson's number 2, Dyson Daniels at 7,100. is 5th. So again, I think here this morning, what's kind of playing out is I'm going to most likely, and I think the field probably the same, I'll have the least amount of total ownership from Golden State here tonight, but I'm going to have more Atlanta than I initially thought. And I think with what the model is spitting out here this morning, we're going to be over the field, maybe the most on these Hawks guys, if you're running an MME build on either site, because they're really sticking out in the GPP scores relative to ownership, all of that good stuff. You can see it on both sides.
And I think what you can do there is like, I'm not saying that you should go stack the Hawks in any given lineup. So maybe it's just like every lineup you have between 1 and 2 Hawks or something like that. That's a rule that you can put in the optimizer that I think would serve you really well. Just let it take its favorite in each lineup, favorite or 2 in each lineup. And now you're not overexposed to the team in the really bad matchup, because the other thing about the matchup, pace down, good defense, not a ton of stocks to go around, is you run into that inverse correlation between teammates a little bit sooner than you do in a great game environment. So that's a reason to not go, oh, I'm going to put Jalen Johnson, Dyson Daniels, and Bogdan in my lineup and build around that core. Don't think you want to do that, but 1 or 2 in every single lineup I think is going to serve you pretty well.
Yep, I'm with it. And I think that's pretty, again, here this morning. I guess the one thing I'll add, if it wasn't clear already, Towns my favorite spend up. Certainly not a hot take. He's the highest projected on player on DraftKings, but I think it's for good reason. It's a great spot.
I would even say from a projection standpoint, I think 52.3 is low in this matchup. Like we were talking about it ahead of the show. Atlanta is a positive matchup for opposing centers in points, rebounds, assists, steals, and blocks. What more can you ask for than that matchup for Karl Anthony Towns, who does tend to produce in all categories? So I think his projection is probably more like 55 in my mind.
Well, when you look back at the game, I think it was November 6th, 34-16, 4 stocks, 1 assist for good measure, 66 DK points on that night. So again, everything continuing to point to Towns being just a fantastic play here tonight, even at ownership, even at the $9,700 price tag.
I think that'll do it for us. What do you think?
Yeah, man, I think I'm propped out. I'm DFS'd out here for the morning. Again, we have big Q tags in terms of the name value of those injury reports. So we'll keep our eye on that leading up to lock, but just 2 games. So kind of, you would think nice and easy going into the finish line here tonight. But if last night taught us anything, we should not expect that. Given, PJ Washington out, Najee Marshall in. Najee's going to be limited to 20 to 25 minutes. Najee Marshall plays 29. So we'll see what happens throughout the rest of the day. But I think we've got a pretty good baseline here, both on Underdog and on the DFS site. So I'm looking forward to this evening and hopefully 2 more great games.
Yep. Also a reminder, we will be back tomorrow, and we will have for the Millie tomorrow at 5:30, myself and Prop God. And then tonight, live at 8 Eastern, I will be soloing the matchups show, so tune into that as well. That show gave us another huge week on Underdog this past Sunday slate, and boy, was it close to being a monstrous one with Hopkins. Still not over that one, and I know a lot of people feel the same way, but you know what will help us get over it? Big wins tonight, big wins tomorrow, and big wins this coming weekend. So hopefully all of that comes our way. Thanks everybody for tuning in. We will catch you next time.